Today I'm going to tell you the story about a lone woman who risks everything to protect a lost Apache boy, finding her own family in his eyes. But her fragile peace is shattered when ruthless bounty hunters arrive to claim him, and a mysterious warrior emerges from the desert with a shocking claim that will change her life forever. Let's show our support for Elara's courage. Can we reach our goal of 100 likes on this incredible story? The sun over the Arizona territory was a merciless white eye in a bleached blue sky. It baked the single dusty street of Dust Devil Gulch until the air itself seemed to shimmer with heat. In the summer of 1882, life on this ragged edge of civilization was a lesson in endurance, as unforgiving as the landscape of cracked earth and skeletal cacti that stretched to the horizon. Elara Vance stood at the window of her small, isolated cabin, her gaze fixed on that endless expanse. It was both her sanctuary and her cage. At 22, she possessed a quiet, striking beauty that set her apart. Hair the color of a raven's wing fell in a thick braid down her back, and her eyes, the color of warm honey, held a depth of sorrow and resilience that few in town cared to understand. That beauty, she had learned, was a dangerous currency in a place where conformity was survival, and a woman alone was a puzzle best left unsolved. A small hand slipped into hers, pulling her from her thoughts. "Elara?" The voice was soft, questioning. She looked down at Little Sparrow, the 5-year-old Apache boy who was the center of her world and the source of her exile. His dark eyes, full of a wisdom beyond his years, searched her face. The townspeople called him a savage, a heathen child she had foolishly taken in. Their whispers followed her like the dust devils that danced down the main street. But their words were meaningless when she looked at this boy. She had found him 2 years prior, a half-starved, silent survivor hidden beneath the charred remains of a wagon. He was the only soul left after a brutal attack that had claimed his family. He was a ghost, and she, a pariah. Together, they had forged a fragile existence on the fringes of a world that wanted neither of them. Their weekly trip to the general store was an exercise in silent defiance. As Elara stepped inside, the low murmur of conversation ceased. Mrs. Gable, the proprietor's wife, gave her a tight, disapproving smile. "Just the usual, Miss Vance?" she asked, her tone making the simple question sound like an accusation. Elara nodded, her voice steady. "Flour, salt, and some beans, if you please." She felt the weight of every gaze, the judgment in the air thick enough to choke on. She kept her chin high, refusing to let them see her vulnerability. She paid for her goods, her movements deliberate and calm, then took Little Sparrow's hand and walked back out into the oppressive heat. The door closed behind them, and she knew the venomous whispers would resume instantly. She had learned that loneliness was a kind of armor, but it was a heavy burden to bear day after day. Their true home was the dry riverbed a mile from her cabin, a secret place shaded by a handful of stubborn cottonwood trees. Here, away from the prying eyes of the town, Little Sparrow could be a child. He chased lizards through the rocks while Elara sat on a smooth, sun-warmed boulder. "Tell me again," he said, coming to rest beside her, his small body leaning against her side. "Tell me how you found me." Elara smiled, a rare and beautiful thing. "The wind was crying that morning," she began, her voice a low murmur. "I followed the sound, thinking it was a lost calf. But it was not a calf. It was a little warrior, hiding from the world." The story was their ritual, a reminder that even in the aftermath of tragedy, something new and precious could be born. It was a story of how 2 broken souls had found in each other a reason to keep fighting. As she spoke, her mind drifted back to another life, one of silk dresses and suffocating expectations in Philadelphia. She was the daughter of a shipping magnate, disowned, and cast out for refusing to marry a cruel, powerful man 3 times her age. She had chosen the unknown dangers of the West over the certain misery of that gilded cage. Fleeing with only what she could carry, she had sought anonymity, a place to disappear. But a lone woman of her bearing was an anomaly in these rough lands, a curiosity that drew the wrong kind of attention. She had learned to be tough, to rely on no one but herself, taking on work that others scorned just to survive. Tending this small, forgotten boy had given her a purpose that went beyond mere survival. It had given her a reason to live. He was her anchor in a world determined to see her drift away. The sound was faint at first, a distant rhythm that did not belong to the desert, the steady beat of shod horses approaching from the south. Elara fell silent, her hand instinctively tightening on Little Sparrow's shoulder. She rose slowly, her eyes scanning the shimmering horizon. 3 riders. They were not ranchers or prospectors. They rode with a predatory stillness, their postures alert and focused. Even from a distance, she could feel the menace that rolled off them like heat from the desert floor. "Stay behind me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The boy, whose instincts were honed by tragedy, needed no second warning. He moved to stand behind her, his small frame partially hidden by her long skirt, his eyes wide and watchful as the figures grew steadily larger. The peace of their sanctuary was about to be shattered. They reined in their horses 20 yards away, the animals blowing and stamping in the dust. The man in the middle was clearly the leader. He had a greasy beard, a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, and cold reptilian eyes that lingered on Elara with an unpleasant familiarity. He dismounted, his spurs jingling a deathly tune. "Well now," he drawled, his voice like gravel. "What have we here? A pretty flower blooming all alone in the desert." His gaze shifted to the boy peeking out from behind her. And her little savage pet. The folks in town were not lying. He took a step closer, his companions fanning out on either side of him. "We are looking for an Apache whelp. Survived a wagon raid a couple years back. There is a handsome reward for his return." Elara's blood ran cold, but her face remained a calm, unreadable mask. She had always feared this day would come. "I'm afraid I cannot help you," she said, her voice clear and firm, betraying none of the terror that seized her heart. "There are no Apache children in this area." The man, Jedediah Kane, let out a harsh laugh that scraped against the silence. "Do not play games with me, girl. We know you have been harboring him. Now we can do this easy, or we can do this hard. Just give us the boy, and we will be on our way. No one needs to get hurt." He rested a hand on the grip of the revolver holstered at his hip. The threat was unspoken, but hung in the air between them, heavy and absolute. Elara positioned herself more firmly in front of Little Sparrow. She would not let them take him. "This child is under my protection," Elara stated, her voice ringing with a strength she did not know she possessed. "You will leave this place now." Jedediah Kane simply sneered, his eyes filled with contempt. "Your protection?" he mocked. "You are one woman. What do you plan to do?" He took another step forward, his hand still resting on his weapon. One of his men chuckled, a low, ugly sound. As Kane began to raise his hand, a new sound cut through the tense air. It was not the wind, nor the scuttling of a lizard. It was the thunder of a single horse, ridden hard and fast, coming over the nearby ridge. All 4 of them turned toward the sound. A lone rider, silhouetted against the unforgiving sun, was bearing down on them with breathtaking speed. This was no cowboy. The rider sat his powerful war pony with a natural grace that spoke of a life spent in the saddle. Long, dark hair flew behind him like a banner of war. As he drew closer, Elara could make out the lean, muscular frame, the buckskin clothing, and the rifle held steady in the crook of his arm. He was an Apache warrior. The confidence on Jedediah Kane's face curdled into a mixture of surprise and apprehension. His men shifted nervously, their hands moving towards their own weapons. The warrior did not slow until he was almost upon them, pulling his pony to a dramatic, dust-kicking halt. He was a magnificent and terrifying sight, his presence shifting the balance of power in an instant. A heavy silence descended upon the dry riverbed, broken only by the panting of the horses. The warrior's obsidian eyes swept over the scene, taking in the 3 rough men, the defiant woman, and finally the small boy hiding behind her. When his gaze met Little Sparrow's, something profound and unspoken passed between them. It was a flash of recognition, of kinship that transcended time and tragedy. The warrior dismounted in one fluid, powerful motion. He stood tall, his expression unreadable, carved from the very stone of the mountains that loomed in the distance. He did not look at Kane or his men. His entire focus was on the child, who took a hesitant step forward, no longer hiding. "He is of the people," the warrior said. His voice was deep and resonant, carrying an authority that needed no weapon to enforce. "He is the son of Black Bear." He finally turned his gaze to Cain, and for the first time, Elara saw a flicker of emotion in his dark eyes, pure, cold contempt. "And I am Stone Wolf, his uncle." Jedediah Cain swallowed hard, his bravado completely gone. "Now hold on," he stammered. "We got papers, a legal claim." Stone Wolf took a slow, deliberate step towards him. "Your paper is meaningless in this land. It is the wind. The boy is blood of my blood. You will not touch him." He spoke English with a quiet precision that made his words all the more menacing. He was not asking. He was declaring a fact as immutable as the sun in the sky. Jedediah Cain, desperate to regain some control, spat on the ground. "This ain't your land no more, heathen. This is our country now, with our laws." He gestured vaguely toward his men, a weak attempt to show strength. "We are taking the boy?" Stone Wolf's expression did not change, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. "Your laws are like winter grass. They wither and blow away. The laws of family, of blood, are like the mountains. They endure." He moved with a speed that was almost invisible. One moment he was standing several feet away. The next he was directly in front of Cain, his hand gripping the front of the man's filthy shirt. The air crackled with the promise of violence, swift and final. Stone Wolf lifted the larger man with startling ease, Cain's spurred boots dangling inches above the ground. Cain's face turned a shade of pale gray, his eyes wide with shock and sudden fear. His two companions froze, their hands hovering uselessly near their holsters, unsure what to do. They had come expecting to intimidate a lone woman, not to face a warrior who moved like a ghost and possessed the strength of a grizzly. "You have one chance," Stone Wolf said, his voice a low growl that seemed to come from deep within the earth. "Ride away from this place. Forget the boy. Forget this woman. If I see your faces in this valley again, the buzzards will grow fat on your bones." He spoke with a chilling certainty that left no room for doubt. He released Cain, who stumbled backward, gasping for air and clutching at his shirt. The man stared at Stone Wolf, his face a mask of hatred and terror. Without another word, he scrambled back to his horse, his two men already mounted and ready to flee. They spurred their animals into a frantic gallop, disappearing back the way they had come, leaving only a cloud of settling dust behind them. The immediate danger had passed, but as Elara looked from the retreating riders to the imposing warrior, a new and more profound fear took root in her heart. He had saved them, but he had also come to claim the boy she considered her son. The silence that fell was filled with 1,000 unspoken questions and the aching certainty of loss. Elara finally found her voice. "Thank you," she said quietly, her hands resting protectively on Little Sparrow's shoulders. Stone Wolf turned to her, and his gaze softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at the bond between them. "You protected him," he stated, not as a question but as a fact he respected. "You have a strong heart." Elara swallowed against the lump in her throat. He is everything to me." The warrior nodded slowly. "He is White Eagle, and he must learn the ways of his people." The words, though spoken gently, felt like a judgment. At that moment, Little Sparrow stepped forward, his small face etched with confusion and pain. He looked from Elara to Stone Wolf. "Do I have to choose?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Can I not have both? Miss Elara is my family too." The child's innocent question hung in the hot, still air, a weight on all their hearts. Stone Wolf knelt, bringing himself down to the boy's level. His imposing frame seemed to shrink, his presence becoming less that of a warrior and more that of an uncle. "Family is not always made of blood, little one," he said, his voice softer than Elara had thought possible. "It is made of courage, of love, of the one who stands beside you when the world is dark." His dark eyes lifted to meet Elara's over the boy's head, and in them she saw a flicker of understanding, a deep and profound respect. She has proven herself family in the truest way. Elara felt tears welling, threatening to spill. "I do not want to lose him," she whispered, the words raw with pain. Stone Wolf stood and walked to his pony. From a small leather pouch tied to his saddle, he withdrew an amulet. It was a single, perfectly shaped piece of turquoise, smooth and cool, strung on a simple leather cord. He returned to the boy and held it out. "This was your mother's," he said gently. "She was a great woman, brave and kind. I see her spirit in the woman who raised you." He placed the amulet around White Eagle's neck. The compliment, so unexpected, made Elara's cheeks flush. She had never been praised for her heart, only for her beauty or her defiance. To be seen, truly seen by this man, was a strange and unsettling feeling. He saw past the outcast, past the lone woman, and saw the protector she had become. He looked from the boy back to Elara, his expression serious. "I must take him back to our winter camp. He must know his people, his grandfather." He paused, his gaze thoughtful as he studied her. He saw the strength in her posture, the intelligence in her honey-colored eyes, the calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work. "Our people, we have lost much," he said slowly. "We have need of those with strong hearts and clever hands. Our healer is old. We have children who need teaching." He held her gaze, and his next words changed the course of her life. "Will you consider coming with us? The woman who saved the son of Black Bear would be honored among us. You would not be an outcast. You would be family." Elara stared at him, stunned into silence. Leave everything? The cabin, the town, the only life she had known for 3 years? To go and live among a people whose ways were completely foreign to her? It was an impossible choice. But then she looked at White Eagle, his face alight with a desperate shining hope. He looked from Stone Wolf to her, his small hand gripping her skirt. "You could come, Elara," he pleaded. "We could stay together." In that moment, she realized her choice had been made long ago, on the day she first held this traumatized child in her arms. She looked at Stone Wolf, the warrior who saw her not as a problem but as an asset. "Where he goes," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I go." A solemn nod was Stone Wolf's only reply, but his eyes showed his approval. "It is a hard journey," he warned, "and life in our camp is not like the life you have known." Elara thought of the cold stairs in town, the crushing loneliness that had been her constant companion. "It could not be worse than what I am leaving behind," she answered quietly. He accepted her words with another nod. "Be ready at dawn in 3 days. I will return for you. Bring only what your heart cannot bear to leave. We will provide the rest." Without another word, he swung himself onto his pony's back, gave them one last, lingering look, and rode away, disappearing into the vast, indifferent landscape as silently as he had arrived. Elara and White Eagle stood alone, the silence of the desert settling around them, now charged with the weight of an unimaginable future. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Elara sorted through her meager possessions, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and excitement. What could she not bear to leave? A worn book of poetry from her mother, her small collection of herbs and medical supplies, a small, intricately carved wooden bird White Eagle had made for her. These were the only true treasures she possessed. She packed them into a single canvas bag. As she worked, she felt the eyes of the town on her. News of the warrior's appearance had spread like wildfire. They watched her comings and goings from behind their curtains, their whispers, now a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. She was no longer just an outcast, she was the woman who was leaving with the Apache. On the morning of the 3rd day, the sky was a canvas of pale pink and gold. Elara and White Eagle stood outside the cabin, their small bundles at their feet. Just as the sun crested the horizon, they appeared. Stone Wolf was not alone. With him were two younger warriors, their faces stern and proud, and an older woman who rode with the grace and authority of a queen. Her long, graying hair was woven with beads, and her dark, intelligent eyes seemed to see everything at once. She was, Elara sensed immediately, a person of great importance. They dismounted, and Stone Wolf made the introductions. "This is Red Hawk and Silent Fox. They will be your son's teachers. And this," he said, gesturing to the woman, "is Whispering Wind. She is a wise woman among our people." Whispering Wind approached Elara, her gaze searching and intense, but not unkind. "I have heard of the woman with the heart of a mountain lion," she said in clear, accented English. "You protected the cub when the pack could not." From a bundle she carried, she produced a garment of the softest, most beautifully tanned deerskin. It was a dress, decorated with intricate quillwork and beads in patterns that spoke of earth and sky. "This is for you," she said simply, "so all will know you are one of us." Then she looked at Elara, a small smile touching her lips. "Among our people, a name is earned. We will call you Spirit of the Mountain Woman. For your strength, which does not bend, and your heart, which sheltered our future." Tears sprang to Elara's eyes. Never had she felt so seen, so honored. The journey north was a passage into another world. They traveled through landscapes of stark and breathtaking beauty, towering red rock canyons, vast plains of golden grass that rippled like a great sea, and hidden streams that ran cool and clear. Elara rode behind Whispering Wind, her body aching from the unfamiliar motion, but her spirit felt strangely liberated. The endless sky and the raw, untamed land seemed to wash away the years of confinement and loneliness. She was leaving behind a world of small rooms and smaller minds for one of infinite possibility. Each sunset painted the sky in colors she had never dreamed of, and each night she slept under a blanket of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The physical hardship was real, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of peace. She watched and she learned. Red Hawk, patient and kind, showed White Eagle how to read the tracks of animals in the dust and the signs of changing weather in the clouds. Silent Fox, as his name suggested, taught more through action than words, showing the boy the art of moving without a sound, of becoming one with the landscape. Whispering Wind was a constant source of wisdom, sharing her knowledge of the desert's secrets. She taught Elara which plants could heal and which could nourish, how to find water where none seemed to exist, and the stories of her people, tales of creation and courage passed down through generations. Elara absorbed it all, feeling a connection to this land and its people, growing stronger with each passing day. In the evenings, they would gather around a small fire. The talk was often quiet, a mix of the Apache language and the careful English they used for her benefit. It was during these moments that she began to see the man behind the stoic warrior. Stone Wolf would sometimes share stories of his own boyhood, of hunts with black bear, or of the traditions that guided his life. He listened intently when she spoke of her own past, his dark eyes filled with a quiet understanding. One night, as White Eagle slept soundly beside the fire, Stone Wolf looked at her. "You are not afraid," he observed. "I was," she admitted. "But it is hard to be afraid when you are finally going home." A faint, rare smile touched his lips, and a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. On the fourth day, as they were crossing a rocky plateau, a sudden violent dust storm descended upon them. The world became a whirlwind of stinging sand and howling wind, disorienting and terrifying. Elara lost sight of the others, her horse rearing in panic. Just as she felt she would be thrown, a powerful arm wrapped around her waist, steadying her. It was Stone Wolf. He had appeared beside her as if from nowhere. "Hold on," he commanded, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. He guided their horses into the shelter of a rock outcropping, where the rest of their party was already gathered. The storm raged around them, but in their small haven they were safe. His hand remained on her back for a long moment, a silent gesture of protection that spoke more than words ever could. When the storm passed, the air was washed clean. Late the next afternoon, Stone Wolf reined in his pony at the crest of a wide mesa. "Look," he said, Below them, nestled in a valley carved by an ancient river, was the Apache camp. It was not the crude collection of shelters she had imagined from sensationalist newspapers. It was a large, well-organized village of hide lodges, or wickiups, their smoke rising in thin columns into the clear air. Children played among the lodges, their laughter echoing in the valley. Women worked at various tasks, their movements efficient and graceful. Men gathered in small groups, talking and mending equipment. It was a community, vibrant and alive, pulsing with the rhythms of a life lived in harmony with the land. "It is beautiful," Elara breathed. "It is home," Stone Wolf replied, pride resonating in his voice. As their small party began its descent, a cry went up from the village. People stopped what they were doing, their faces turning towards the riders. A current of excitement and disbelief spread through the camp. All eyes were on them, and Elara could feel the intensity of their collective gaze. There was curiosity, wonder, and in some eyes that fell upon her, deep suspicion. She straightened her back, her heart pounding. White Eagle, who had been chattering excitedly just moments before, fell silent, his small hand finding hers. He was about to meet the people who had mourned him as lost, the family he could not remember. This was the moment that would define the rest of his life, and hers. When they reached the edge of the village, an old man stepped forward, his face a magnificent map of wrinkles, his posture commanding despite his age. This was the chief, the grandfather. Stone Wolf dismounted and approached him with deep respect, speaking rapidly in their native tongue and gesturing toward the boy. The old chief's eyes widened, and tears began to stream down his weathered cheeks. He moved towards White Eagle slowly, as if approaching a sacred vision. "White Eagle," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the boy's face. "You have your father's eyes." The boy stared up at him, a flicker of a long-buried memory crossing his face. "Grandfather?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. The old chief nodded, unable to speak, and pulled the boy into a gentle, fierce embrace. A collective sigh of joy and wonder went through the crowd as people surged forward. They were family, friends, people who had loved his parents. They touched his hair, spoke his name, their faces alight with a miracle. Elara stood back, her own eyes filled with tears, feeling a profound sense of rightness. This was where he belonged, but as the crowd enveloped the boy, she became aware of the others, those who stood at the edges, their arms crossed, their faces hard and unwelcoming as they stared at her. Stone Wolf moved to stand beside her, his presence a solid, reassuring shield. "Some will need time," he said quietly. "Let your actions speak for you." Whispering Wind appeared at her side and gently took her arm. "Come," she said. "It is time." She led Elara to a large wickiup, the air inside cool and smelling of sage and wood smoke. The deerskin dress was laid out waiting for her. With the old woman's help, Elara shed her worn traveling clothes and slipped on the beautiful garment. It felt like a second skin, soft and supple. When she stepped back out into the sunlight, she saw a subtle shift in the eyes of the people. The dress was a symbol, a declaration. It did not erase their questions, but it announced that she had been accepted by one of their own, and that carried immense weight. White Eagle ran to her, his face glowing. "They are having a feast for me," he said breathlessly. "And for you." As evening fell, a great fire was lit in the center of the village, its flames leaping towards a sky full of stars. The entire tribe gathered, the air filled with the smell of roasting meat and the sound of drums. After the celebratory meal, the old chief stood. He spoke at length in his own language, his voice powerful and emotional. Then he called White Eagle forward. The boy stood tall, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. In a clear, strong voice, he told his story, his words translated by Stone Wolf for Elara's benefit. He spoke of being lost and found. "I bring with me the woman who saved my life," he concluded. "Who was my mother when I had none? She left her world so I could know mine. She is Spirit of the Mountain Woman, and she is my family." A murmur of assent went through the crowd. The boy's words, so simple and true, had touched their hearts. Stone Wolf then stood, his tall frame commanding attention. "The boy speaks the truth," he declared, his voice ringing through the night. "This woman's heart is strong. Her courage is proven. She does not carry our blood, but she carries our spirit of survival, of love for family. She is welcome in my lodge. She is welcome among us." While a few faces in the crowd remained impassive, the tide of acceptance had turned. She was no longer just the strange white woman. She was the protector of their chief's son, vouched for by one of their greatest warriors. For the first time in years, Elara did not feel alone. Later, as the dancing and drumming reached a crescendo, Elara stepped back into the shadows to simply watch, to absorb the overwhelming reality of it all. Stone Wolf appeared at her side, as silent as his namesake. "You are smiling," he observed. "I had forgotten how," she admitted, her voice soft. "This is more than I ever allowed myself to hope for." He was quiet for a long moment. "And what do you hope for now, Spirit of the Mountain Woman?" The question was simple, yet it held the weight of her entire future. She looked at the dancing flames, at the happy face of her son, and then up at the stoic warrior beside her. "To be useful," she said. "To belong. To see him grow into the man his father would be proud of." She paused, then looked him in the eye. "And I hope to one day find a partner who understands that a quiet heart can be as strong as a loud one." The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Elara found her place not through grand gestures, but through quiet, steady work. Her knowledge of herbs and healing, though different from their own, proved invaluable. She helped Whispering Wind tend to the sick, her gentle hands and calm demeanor soothing fretful children and weary elders. She did not try to change their ways, but simply added her knowledge to theirs, earning respect through her skill and humility. She learned to grind corn, to tan hides, to bead intricate patterns onto leather. The women of the tribe, who had at first been wary, began to welcome her into their circle, sharing stories and laughter as they worked. She was becoming a part of the fabric of their lives. White Eagle blossomed. Under the tutelage of Red Hawk and Silent Fox, he grew stronger and more confident each day. He learned to use a bow, to track deer, to listen to the language of the wind and the trees. He absorbed the stories and traditions of his people, his heritage becoming a living part of him. But every evening, he would return to the lodge that Elara now shared with Whispering Wind. He would sit beside her and tell her of his day, his head resting against her shoulder. He was becoming a young Apache warrior, but he was still her son. Their bond, forged in sorrow and solitude, remained the unshakable foundation of his new life, a truth that everyone in the village came to understand and respect. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Elara sat on a small rise overlooking the village. The sounds of the camp drifted up to her, the laughter of children, the murmur of conversation, the rhythmic beat of a distant drum. She felt a profound sense of peace. Stone Wolf approached and sat beside her, the silence between them, comfortable and deep. They watched the last light fade from the sky. "You have found your home," he said, not as a question. "Yes," she replied simply. "More than I ever knew was possible." He turned to her, his dark eyes serious in the twilight. "My heart has been a lonely hunter for many seasons," he said, his voice low and steady. "It has found its home now, too, beside yours." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was not forceful, but gentle and sure. It was a question and a promise all in one. Elara looked at their joined hands, then up into his face. In his eyes, she saw not just a warrior, but a man of honor, of kindness, and of a deep, quiet strength that mirrored her own. She saw a future she had never dared to imagine. Her answer was not in words, but in the way her fingers curled around his, accepting. Below them, the fires of the village glowed like earthbound stars. White Eagle ran towards them, his face bright with joy. He was home. And so was she, the outcast from Philadelphia and the Apache warrior, brought together by a lost child, had found in the heart of the unforgiving wilderness their own small piece of heaven.